David Rodriguez pushed his cleaning cart through the back entrance of the Riverside Concert Hall, just like he had done every single evening for the past 3 years. The wheels squeaked slightly as he made his way down the familiar corridor, passing framed photographs of famous musicians who had graced the stage over the decades. Their faces stared out from behind the glass, frozen in moments of triumph. David never stopped to look at them anymore. He had memorized every single one during his first month on the job. It was 9:47 p.m. when he reached the main auditorium. The last of the orchestra members had left about 20 minutes ago. He could still smell the faint trace of expensive perfume and roseanne from the violin bows lingering in the air. A crumpled program lay abandoned on one of the red velvet seats in the third row. Someone had left their coffee cup on the armrest in row 12. David made a mental note as he surveyed the space. This was his domain now, at least for the next few hours. The massive concert hall with its soaring ceiling and crystal chandeliers belonged to him in a way it never could during the day. During rehearsals and performances, he was nobody. The musicians walked past him like he was furniture. The administrative staff gave him polite nods but never remembered his name, even though he wore a name tag every single day. To them, he was just the guy who made sure the floors were shiny and the trash cans were empty. David didn't take it personally. Not anymore. He had learned a long time ago that people only saw what they expected to see. When you wore a maintenance uniform and carried a mop, you became invisible. It was like having a superpower, except instead of flying or super strength, you just disappeared from people's awareness. Sometimes he would stand right next to a group of musicians having a heated discussion about a piece of music, and they would talk as if he wasn't even there. They would complain about the conductor, gossip about other players, share their deepest frustrations, all while David wiped down the railings 3 feet away. But David had discovered something valuable about being invisible. It gave him freedom. It gave him time. And most importantly, it gave him access to the one thing in this entire building that made his heart race with a mixture of desire and fear. The Steinway grand piano sitting center stage. He started his cleaning routine the same way every night. First the lobby, then the restrooms, then the administrative offices on the second floor. He saved the main auditorium for last, always. The anticipation built inside him as he worked through his checklist, mopping and wiping and emptying trash bins. His movements were automatic after 3 years. His mind could wander while his hands did the work they had done 1,000 times before. Tonight, as he finally pushed open the heavy doors to the auditorium, David felt the familiar flutter in his chest. The stage lights were off, but the work lights backstage cast a dim glow across the space. The piano sat there like a sleeping giant, its polished black surface reflecting the scattered light. David began his usual routine, starting with the upper balcony seats and working his way down. He picked up the abandoned program and the forgotten coffee cup. He swept the aisles and polished the brass railings. All the while, his eyes kept drifting back to the piano. David had never planned to become a janitor. Life just had a way of taking you down paths you never expected. He had grown up in a small apartment where money was always tight. His grandmother, who had raised him after his parents divorced, worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table. There was no money for piano lessons or music school. Those were luxuries for other kids, the ones who lived in houses with yards and went on summer vacations. But his grandmother had loved music. She would play old records on a scratched-up turntable, filling their tiny apartment with the sounds of jazz and classical music and soul. When David was 12, she came home one Saturday with an electronic keyboard she had found at a yard sale. $25. Most of the keys stuck and the speaker crackled, but to David, it might as well have been a Steinway Grand. His grandmother showed him the few things she remembered from her own childhood, back when her father had briefly tried to teach her. Then she handed him the keyboard and said, "The rest is up to you, mijo." David taught himself to play using library books and later YouTube videos. He would spend hours with headphones on, his fingers moving across those sticky keys, teaching himself scales and chords and eventually full pieces. He got pretty good. Good enough that his high school music teacher encouraged him to apply to music schools. But by then his grandmother was sick, and college applications required money they didn't have. So David graduated, got a job, and helped take care of her until she passed away 2 years later. After that, music became something private, something he kept locked away inside himself, like a secret language nobody else spoke. He worked various jobs over the years. Always something simple that paid the bills. When the maintenance position opened up at the concert hall, he applied because it was close to his apartment and the pay was decent. He never mentioned in the interview that he could play piano. What would be the point? But then came his first night working alone in the building. He had finished his cleaning rounds and was about to leave when he found himself standing on the stage, looking at the piano. Just one key, he told himself, just to hear what a real concert grand sounded like. He pressed middle C with his index finger. The sound that emerged was like nothing he had ever heard before. It was rich and clear and somehow alive in a way his old keyboard had never been. That one note turned into a scale. The scale turned into a chord progression. Before he knew it, David was sitting on the bench, both hands on the keys, playing a simple melody he had learned years ago. He played for maybe 5 minutes before panic set in. What if someone heard? What if there were security cameras? What if he got fired for touching equipment he had no business touching? He had rushed out of the building that night, his heart pounding, convinced he would be called into the supervisor's office the next day. But nothing happened. Nobody said anything. Nobody had noticed. So the next week he tried again. 10 minutes this time. Then 15. Over the months it became his ritual. After finishing his cleaning duties, he would allow himself this small rebellion. He would sit at that piano and play, always careful, always listening for footsteps or voices, always ready to jump up and return to his mop and bucket. 3 years later, David had become skilled at this double life. By day, he was the invisible maintenance man. By night, after everyone left, he was a pianist with a concert hall all to himself. He played pieces he had learned from videos, improvised his own melodies, and worked through the complicated emotions he never quite knew how to express with words. The piano became his therapist, his friend, his secret escape from a life that felt stuck in place. As David finished mopping the last section of the concert hall floor, he glanced at his watch. 11:23 p.m. The building was definitely empty now. The security guard made his rounds on the other side of the complex at this hour. David had timed it out perfectly over the years. He had at least 15 minutes, maybe 20 if he was lucky, before he needed to pack up and go home. He put away his cleaning supplies in the utility closet backstage. Then, with his heart beating just a little faster than normal, David walked across the stage he had just cleaned and sat down at the piano. His fingers found their familiar positions on the keys. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and began to play. Teresa Chen stood in the parking lot of the concert hall, patting down her jacket pockets for the 3rd time. Her reading glasses. Where were her reading glasses? She mentally retraced her steps from the evening. She had been reviewing next month's program schedules in her office. She remembered taking off her glasses and setting them down on the desk when her assistant knocked on the door. Then the phone had rung, and there had been that whole situation with the guest conductor's hotel reservation, and somehow she had walked out of the building without picking them back up. As the artistic director of the Riverside Concert Hall, Teresa prided herself on being organized and detail-oriented. Forgetting her glasses was exactly the kind of thing that annoyed her about herself. She needed them to finish reviewing the contracts waiting for her at home. She checked her watch. Almost midnight. The maintenance staff would still be there. She could just slip in, grab her glasses, and be gone in 5 minutes. Teresa pulled her keys from her purse and headed back toward the building. The parking lot was nearly empty now, just 2 cars besides hers. The janitor's old Honda, and probably the night security guard's truck. The main entrance was locked, but she had a master key. As she approached the door, she heard something that made her stop. Music. Piano music, specifically. But it was coming from inside the building, and that made no sense. Everyone had left hours ago. The rehearsal had ended at 8:30. She had been the last one out, or so she thought. Maybe someone from the orchestra had come back. But why would they be playing at this hour? Teresa unlocked the door as quietly as she could and stepped inside. The music was clearer now, drifting down from the direction of the main auditorium. It wasn't one of the pieces the orchestra had been rehearsing. This was something different, something she had never heard before. The melody had a haunting quality to it, like it was being created in real time rather than read from sheet music. It moved between styles in a way that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did, touching on classical structures, but adding jazz harmonies and something else entirely, something raw and personal. She walked slowly down the corridor, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. The music grew louder as she approached the auditorium doors. One of them was slightly ajar, and warm light spilled through the opening. Teresa eased the door open just enough to see inside, and what she saw made her freeze in place. The maintenance man sat at the Steinway Grand. She recognized him, of course, though she was ashamed to realize she couldn't remember his name.
He had cleaned these halls for years.
She had passed him countless times, offered polite smiles, maybe said hello occasionally, but she had never really seen him, not the way she was seeing him now. His eyes were closed, his whole body swaying slightly with the music. His hands moved across the keys with remarkable ease and confidence. This wasn't someone tentatively picking out a melody. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who had a real relationship with the instrument. The piece he was playing built slowly, layer upon layer of sound, creating something that felt both melancholic and hopeful at the same time. Teresa found herself holding her breath. In her 20 years working in the classical music world, she had heard thousands of performances. She had listened to prodigies and masters, famous soloists and talented amateurs, but there was something about this moment that felt different. Maybe it was the unexpectedness of it. Maybe it was the vulnerability of watching someone play when they thought no one was listening. Or maybe it was simply that the music itself was genuinely beautiful. The piece shifted into what felt like its final movement. The tempo slowed, and the melody became simpler, more direct. It reminded Teresa of a lullaby or perhaps a prayer. The maintenance man's fingers moved more gently now, coaxing soft, delicate notes from the piano. The sound filled the empty concert hall, and Teresa felt unexpected tears forming in her eyes. When was the last time music had moved her like this? Somewhere along the way, in all the administrative meetings and budget concerns and scheduling conflicts, she had forgotten why she had chosen this career in the first place. The final notes hung in the air for a moment before fading into silence. The maintenance man sat perfectly still, his hands resting on the keys, his eyes still closed. Teresa wondered what he was thinking, what emotions had just poured out through his fingers onto that piano. She knew she should probably leave, slip away before he noticed her. This felt like a private moment, something she had accidentally intruded upon. But then, almost without thinking, she found herself stepping fully into the auditorium. Her movement must have made a sound because the man's eyes suddenly opened. He saw her standing there in the doorway, and the expression that crossed his face made Teresa's heart sink. Pure fear. He jumped up from the piano bench so fast it almost tipped over. I'm so sorry," he stammered, his words tumbling over each other. "I know I shouldn't have touched it. I finished all my work and I thought everyone was gone and I'll never do it again, I promise. Please, I really need this job." Teresa raised her hand, trying to stop the flow of panicked apologies. "Wait, please, just hold on." She walked down the aisle toward the stage, her mind racing. She could see his whole body was tense, ready to bolt. "What's your name?" He looked confused by the question, like maybe it was a trick. "David," he said quietly. "David Rodriguez." David. Teresa stopped at the foot of the stage and looked up at him. "How long have you been playing piano?" He seemed even more confused now. This clearly wasn't the conversation he expected to have. "Since I was a kid, I guess. My grandmother got me a keyboard at a yard sale. I just, taught myself mostly. YouTube videos and stuff." "I'm sorry, am I fired?" "Fired?" Teresa shook her head. "David, that was beautiful. What you were just playing. Was that an original composition?" David's expression shifted from fear to bewilderment. Sort of. I just kind of make stuff up sometimes. It's not anything professional or whatever. I never studied music formally or anything like that." "How long have you been doing this?" Teresa asked. "Playing here after hours?" David looked down at his shoes. "About 3 years. Since I started working here. I'm really sorry. I never hurt the piano or anything. I'm always really careful. And I only do it after all my work is done." Teresa was quiet for a moment, processing this information. 3 years. This man had been working in her building for 3 years, and she had never known. Had never asked. Had never bothered to see past the uniform and the mop bucket. How many other people did she pass every day without really seeing them? How much talent was walking around invisible because it came in unexpected packages? "I came back for my reading glasses," she said finally. "I left them in my office. But I heard you playing and I had to know who it was." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "David, have you ever performed in front of people?" Like in a concert? He let out a nervous laugh. No way. That's not for people like me. What do you mean, people like you? David gestured at his maintenance uniform. I clean floors. I empty trash cans. I didn't go to Juilliard. I don't have a music degree. I can barely read sheet music. This is just something I do for myself, you know? It's not real. Not real? Teresa felt a flash of frustration, though not at David. At the whole system that had convinced someone with this much talent that it didn't count because it hadn't come through the proper channels. David, what you just played was more real than half the performances on this stage. You made me cry, and I haven't cried at a concert in 15 years. David looked skeptical and uncomfortable, like he wanted this conversation to end so he could go back to being invisible. But Teresa's mind was already working, already forming an idea. The concert hall had a community outreach program, informal lunchtime concerts featuring local musicians. It was a chance to showcase talent that might not otherwise get heard. Why not David? I want you to perform, she said. What? No way. David was shaking his head vigorously. I appreciate it, but that's not my world. I'm fine with things the way they are. Just one performance, Teresa persisted. One lunchtime concert. 30 minutes. You play whatever you want. If you hate it, you never have to do it again. But I think people need to hear what you can do. Why? David asked, and there was real confusion in his voice. Why does it matter? Teresa thought about that question. Why did it matter? Maybe because she had forgotten that music was supposed to be about passion and emotion, not just technical precision and impressive credentials. Maybe because this building needed to remember that it belonged to everyone, not just the professionals and the formally trained. Or maybe because she had just witnessed something beautiful and rare, and keeping it hidden felt like a crime. Because you have a gift, she said simply, and gifts are meant to be shared. David stood there on the stage looking torn and terrified and tempted all at once. Teresa waited, letting him process. Finally, he let out a long breath. Just one performance, he said, and then we forget this ever happened. Teresa smiled. Just one performance, but even as she said it, she had a feeling that nothing was going to go back to the way it was before. The 3 weeks between that midnight conversation and the performance were some of the longest in David's life. He had tried to back out twice. The first time was 2 days after agreeing, when the reality of what he had committed to really hit him. He had caught Teresa in the hallway and tried to explain that he had made a mistake, that he wasn't ready, that maybe they should just forget the whole thing. She had listened patiently, then asked him one simple question. Are you afraid of failing or are you afraid of succeeding? That question had stuck in his head for days. The second time was a week before the performance. David had been watching the orchestra rehearse during his lunch break, something he rarely did. He sat in the back row of the balcony where no one would notice him, and watched these trained musicians run through a complicated piece. They were so polished, so professional, so sure of themselves. Every note was precise. Every movement was practiced. What was he thinking? Believing he could share a stage with people like this. He was about to get up and go find Teresa to cancel when he noticed something. One of the violinists in the second row had made a mistake. Just a small one, barely noticeable. But instead of falling apart, she kept playing. She didn't stop. She didn't apologize. She just continued with the music. That moment somehow helped. These perfect musicians made mistakes too. They were human. Maybe David could be human up there on that stage as well. Still, as Wednesday arrived, the day of the performance, David felt like he might throw up. He had barely slept the night before. He kept running through the piece in his mind, worried that his fingers would forget what they had played hundreds of times. What if he froze? What if his hands shook so badly he couldn't play? What if people laughed? Teresa had told him the performance would be during lunch around 12:30, and that it would be casual. Just staff members and maybe some regular concert goers who came to these community events. She estimated maybe 30 or 40 people. Small, intimate, nothing to worry about, she had said, though David noticed she wouldn't quite meet his eyes when she said it. That morning, David went about his usual routine. He mopped the East Wing bathrooms. He replaced light bulbs in the administrative offices. He restocked paper towels. The familiar work helped calm his nerves a little. At least his hands knew how to do something right. Around 11:45, he put away his cleaning cart and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. He looked at his reflection, at his navy blue maintenance uniform with his name embroidered on the chest. Teresa had told him not to change clothes, that he should perform exactly as he was. Authenticity matters, she had said. David wasn't sure what authenticity meant in this context, but he trusted Teresa. Sort of. Mostly. He splashed some water on his face, took a deep breath, and headed toward the auditorium. When he pushed open the doors, his heart sank. There were way more than 30 or 40 people. The seats were at least half full, maybe more. People were still filing in, chatting with each other, holding lunch bags and coffee cups. David spotted several orchestra members he recognized. There were administrative staff, regular audience members, and faces he had never seen before. His legs felt weak. Teresa appeared at his elbow, seeming to materialize out of nowhere. "David, hey, you're here. Good. Are you ready?" "There are so many people," David whispered. "You said 30 or 40. Teresa had the grace to look slightly guilty. "Well, word got out. I might have mentioned it to a few people, and then they mentioned it to other people, and you know how these things go." She put a hand on his shoulder. "But that's good, David. It means people are interested. They want to hear you play." David wanted to run. Every instinct in his body was screaming at him to turn around and leave. He could go back to his cleaning cart, back to being invisible, back to the safety of playing piano alone at midnight when no one was watching. Why had he agreed to this? This wasn't his world. These weren't his people, but then he thought about his grandmother. She had never gotten to hear him play on a real piano. She had died 2 months before he got the job at the concert hall. She used to tell him that talent was a gift from God, but what you did with that talent was your gift back. He had kept his gift hidden for so long. Maybe, just for today, just for these 30 minutes, he could let it out into the light. "Okay," David heard himself say. "Okay, let's do this." Teresa squeezed his shoulder and smiled. Then she walked out onto the stage to introduce him. David watched from the wings, his heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. He saw her gesture toward the audience, saw people settling into their seats, and then he heard his name. "Please welcome David Rodriguez, one of our own here at Riverside Concert Hall." This was it. David walked out onto the stage, and suddenly everything felt surreal. The lights were brighter than he expected. The audience was a blur of faces. He could hear a few people clapping politely, uncertainly. He made his way to the piano. The same piano he had played 1,000 times in the dark, and it looked different somehow. Foreign. The bench seemed higher than usual. His hands felt like they belonged to someone else. He sat down, adjusted the bench, placed his hands on the keys. The smooth ivory felt familiar, at least solid and real. David closed his eyes, trying to block out everything else. The audience. The lights, the fear. He took a breath and let it out slowly. Then he began to play. For the first few seconds, his fingers were stiff, uncertain. The notes came out mechanical and scared. But then something shifted. Maybe it was muscle memory. Maybe it was the comfort of the melody he had played so many times before. But slowly, David felt himself slipping into the music the way he always did at midnight when he was alone. The audience faded. The lights dimmed in his awareness. There was just him and the piano and the story he was trying to tell with the keys. The piece he had chosen was the same one Teresa had heard that first night. It started soft and contemplative. A simple melody in the right hand with gentle chords in the left. Then it began to build, adding layers and complexity, the tempo increasing slightly as the emotions intensified. David poured everything into it. All the frustration of dreams deferred, all the joy of stolen moments at this piano, all the fear and hope and longing that he usually kept locked away inside. His hands knew what to do. They moved across the keys with confidence now, finding the notes without him having to think about it. The music swelled and dipped, raced and slowed, building toward something that felt like both an ending and a beginning at the same time. David didn't know how the audience was reacting. He couldn't hear anything except the piano. He didn't want to know if people were bored or impressed or confused. All that mattered was finishing this piece, playing it the way it deserved to be played, honoring the music that had kept him company for so many lonely nights. The final section arrived, the part where everything simplified again, where the melody became almost childlike in its purity. David played it softly, tenderly, like a secret being shared with a close friend. The last chord hung in the air for a moment, resonating through the hall. Then silence. David opened his eyes. He kept his hands on the keys, not quite ready to let go. not quite ready to face whatever came next. And then he heard it, applause, not polite golf claps. Real applause, loud and sustained and enthusiastic. He turned slightly toward the audience, and what he saw shocked him. People were standing up. A standing ovation. Some people had tears on their faces. Others were smiling widely, clapping so hard their hands had to hurt. David stood up from the bench, feeling dazed and overwhelmed. He gave a small, awkward bow, unsure what else to do. The applause continued. He saw Teresa standing in the wings, beaming at him, her eyes glistening. He saw orchestra members he had worked alongside for years, now looking at him like they were seeing him for the first time. He saw office workers and security guards and ushers all on their feet, all celebrating something he had created. It was too much. All of it. The attention, the vulnerability, the sudden visibility after years of being invisible. David gave one more quick nod to the audience and walked off stage, his legs shaky, his mind reeling. Teresa met him in the wings and hugged him, saying something he couldn't quite process. Other people approached, wanting to shake his hand, to tell him how moved they were, to ask questions about where he learned to play and whether he was performing again soon. David answered as best he could, but everything felt distant and strange, like he was watching himself from outside his body. He had done it. He had actually done it. He had played in front of people and they hadn't laughed. They had cried. They had stood up for him. But as David finally escaped the crowd and made his way back to the quiet of the utility closet where he kept his cleaning supplies, he had no idea that everything was about to get much more complicated, because in that audience, at least a dozen people had pulled out their phones during his performance. They had recorded his playing, and in a few hours those videos would be spreading across the internet, and David's quiet, invisible life would be changed forever. David's phone started buzzing around 3 p.m. that afternoon. At first, it was just a few texts from his cousin asking if he was the guy in the video going viral. David had no idea what she was talking about. He was in the middle of cleaning the upper balcony restrooms, trying to process what had happened earlier, trying to get back to some sense of normalcy. The performance felt like a dream now, something that had happened to someone else. Then his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again. Different number. Then another text. This time from an old high school friend he hadn't spoken to in 5 years. "Dude, you're all over Twitter. That's amazing." David's stomach dropped. He pulled out his phone and opened social media for the first time that day. The first video he found had been posted by someone named Jennifer, who apparently worked in the concert hall's ticket office. "Maintenance man stuns concert hall with hidden talent," read the caption. The video had been shared over 15,000 times. The comment section was flooded with reactions. "This made me cry. Pure talent. This is what real music sounds like. Who is this guy?" David scrolled down, his hands starting to shake. There were more videos, different angles, different captions. One had over 50,000 views already. His phone rang again. This time it was Teresa. He answered, his voice coming out strangled. "What's happening?" "David, where are you?" Teresa sounded excited, almost breathless. "The videos are everywhere. We've had 3 local news stations call asking to interview you. The phone in the ticket office hasn't stopped ringing. People want to know when you're performing next." "I don't understand," David said. Even though he did understand, he just didn't want to. "How did this happen so fast?" "The internet, David, that's how these things work now. Someone posts a video, it resonates with people, and suddenly it's everywhere." She paused. "This is good news. This is incredible exposure for you." But it didn't feel like good news to David. It felt like his skin was being peeled back, like his private world was being invaded by thousands of strangers. He had agreed to one performance, one small intimate concert for a handful of people. He hadn't agreed to this. By the time David got home that evening, his phone had 17 missed calls and over 100 notifications. He turned it off and sat in his apartment staring at the wall. The videos kept playing in his head. Not the performance itself, but the idea of thousands of people watching him, judging him, forming opinions about who he was based on 30 minutes they had seen online. The next morning was worse. When David arrived at the concert hall for his shift, there were people waiting outside. Not many, maybe 5 or 6, but they were clearly there for him. One woman rushed up as he approached the employee entrance. "Are you David? From the video? Can I get a picture with you?" David mumbled something about needing to get to work and slipped inside as quickly as he could. But the building felt different now, too. People who had never acknowledged his existence before were suddenly stopping him in the hallways. "That was beautiful, man. When's your next show? Have you thought about recording an album?" Orchestra members who had walked past him like furniture for 3 years now wanted to chat about his technique and musical influences. It should have felt good. Part of him knew that. These people were being kind. They were impressed. They were giving him recognition he had never received before. But instead of feeling validated, David felt exposed and overwhelmed. This wasn't what he wanted. He hadn't wanted to become visible. He had liked being invisible. He had liked his quiet life, his private moments with the piano, his simple routine that no one paid attention to. By the third day, the media attention had intensified. A local morning show wanted him to perform live. A talent agent left 3 voicemails explaining how he could monetize this moment. A music producer from Los Angeles sent an email about recording demos. The concert hall's board of directors had called an emergency meeting to discuss maximizing this opportunity. Even the mayor's office had reached out, something about performing at a city event. David stopped going to the main areas of the building during work hours. He stuck to the back corridors, the utility rooms, anywhere people wouldn't find him. He started arriving earlier and leaving later, adjusting his schedule to avoid the crowds that had started showing up hoping to catch a glimpse of the viral piano janitor, as one headline had called him. Teresa found him one afternoon in the basement storage area, organizing cleaning supplies that didn't need organizing. She sat down on an overturned bucket and just looked at him for a moment. "You're hiding." David didn't deny it. "I didn't sign up for this." "I know," Teresa said quietly. "And I'm sorry. I should have anticipated that this might happen. In today's world, nothing stays small anymore." "I just wanted to play piano," David said, and he heard the frustration in his own voice. "That's all. I was happy with the way things were. Why couldn't that be enough?" Teresa was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something? When I first started in this business, I was a cellist. Not a great one, but decent. I loved playing. But somewhere along the way, I got so caught up in the administrative side of things, the business side, that I forgot why I fell in love with music in the first place." She paused. "Watching you play the other day reminded me. You weren't performing for recognition or money or fame. You were playing because you had to, because the music needed to come out." "That's rare, David. That's precious. So what am I supposed to do?" David asked. "Quit my job? Become some kind of viral sensation? Start a YouTube channel?" "That's not me. I'm not that person. You don't have to be anything you don't want to be," Teresa said. "But you also can't unring this bell. People know about you now. They know you exist. And yes, some of that attention is overwhelming and unwanted. But some of it, David, some of it is people genuinely connecting with your music. I've read the comments. Do you know how many people said your performance was exactly what they needed that day? How many people said it reminded them why they love music?" David had read some of the comments too, late at night when he couldn't sleep. Between the generic praise and the inevitable trolls were messages that had surprised him. A woman going through chemotherapy who said his music gave her peace. A teacher who played the video for his students to show them that talent comes in unexpected packages. A teenager who said it inspired him to keep practicing even though his family couldn't afford formal lessons. "I don't know how to be that person," David admitted. "The person everyone wants me to be." "Maybe you don't have to be," Teresa said. "Maybe you just have to be yourself." But David wasn't even sure who that was anymore. The invisible maintenance man who played piano in secret? Or this new person everyone had decided he should become? That weekend, David's phone rang with yet another unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. It was a producer from a national talent competition show, the kind where contestants performed for celebrity judges and millions of viewers. They wanted him to audition. They loved his story and thought he would be perfect for their show. The exposure would be enormous. It could launch a real career in music. David listened to the pitch, thanked them politely, and said he would think about it. After he hung up, he sat on his couch for a long time, thinking about his grandmother and her yard sale keyboard. Thinking about all those midnight hours alone with the piano. Thinking about that moment on stage when the music had taken over and nothing else had mattered. The attention felt like it was smothering him, turning something pure into something complicated. All these people wanted something from him now. They wanted more performances, more videos, more of whatever it was they thought they had seen in those 30 minutes. But what David wanted, what he had always wanted, was just to play. On Monday morning, David showed up to work with a decision half formed in his mind. He found Teresa in her office, papers spread across her desk, classical music playing softly from her computer speakers. She looked up when he knocked, and something in his expression made her gesture for him to close the door and sit down. "I need to tell you something," David said, "and I need you to really listen." Teresa nodded, setting down her pen, giving him her full attention. And for the first time since that performance, David felt like maybe, just maybe, he could find a way through this that didn't require him to become someone he wasn't. He just had to figure out what that looked like. He had to find a way to share his gift without losing himself in the process. And that, he was beginning to realize, was going to be harder than any piece of music he had ever learned to play. David took a deep breath and looked at Teresa across her desk. "I don't want to be famous," he said. "I don't want to be on TV or sign a record deal or any of that stuff. That's not why I play music." Teresa nodded slowly, not interrupting, letting him continue. "But I've been thinking about something," David went on. "All those comments I read online, all those messages from people. There were so many who said they wished they could learn piano but never had the chance. People who work regular jobs like me, who never got formal training, who think music is something that belongs to other people." He paused, trying to find the right words. "What if we could do something for them?" "What did you have in mind?" Teresa asked, leaning forward with interest. Over the next hour, David explained his idea. He wanted to stay at the concert hall, keep his maintenance job, but also start a music program. Not for kids, there were already plenty of those. This would be for adults who had always wanted to learn an instrument but thought they had missed their chance. Working people who couldn't afford expensive private lessons. Older folks who had always dreamed of playing but never had the opportunity. People like him. He imagined Saturday workshops where anyone could come and learn, regardless of their background or income. The concert hall had instruments that sat unused most of the time. They had space. They had resources. And now, thanks to all the attention from the videos, they had publicity. David wasn't interested in performing on talk shows, but he was interested in this, teaching people that it was never too late, that you didn't need to be formally trained to make music. That talent wasn't just for the privileged few. Teresa listened to his entire proposal, and when he finished, she was smiling. "David, that's brilliant. But you know it's going to take work, right? Real work. Planning, organizing, recruiting other teachers, handling logistics." "I know," David said, "but I want to do it. If I'm going to use this attention for something, let it be this, something that actually matters." They spent the next 2 months putting it together. Teresa helped David present the idea to the concert hall's board of directors. The board, seeing both the community value and the positive publicity opportunity, approved funding for the program. They would call it the Open Keys Initiative. Free music education for adults, no experience required, no auditions, no prerequisites except a genuine desire to learn. David turned down the talent show audition. He politely declined the record label interest. He told the agents and producers that he appreciated their offers, but they weren't the right fit for him. Some people thought he was crazy, turning down opportunities that most musicians would kill for. But David knew what he wanted, and it wasn't that. The local news did end up doing a story on him, but not about his viral video. They covered the Open Keys Initiative instead, focusing on the program's mission rather than David's overnight fame. That felt better. More honest. More in line with who he actually was. On a Saturday morning in early spring, David stood at the entrance of the concert hall's rehearsal room, watching people arrive for the program's first day. He had expected maybe 20 or 30 people. Over 60 showed up. They ranged in age from 19 to 74. There was a security guard from a local hospital who had always wanted to learn violin, a bus driver interested in the cello, a retired teacher who dreamed of playing the flute, a grocery store cashier who saved for months to buy a used clarinet but didn't know how to start, a construction worker who had taught himself a few chords on guitar and wanted to learn more. David welcomed each person, learning their names, hearing their stories. So many of them started their introductions the same way. "I'm probably too old for this," or "I don't have any musical background," or "I'm sure everyone else here is better than me." David recognized that fear, that feeling of not belonging. He had felt it himself standing on that stage 2 months ago. "Nobody here is too old," David told the group once everyone had arrived. "Nobody here is too inexperienced. This program exists because someone decided that music doesn't belong only to people who started lessons when they were 5 years old. It belongs to all of us." Teresa had helped David recruit other volunteer teachers, professional musicians from the orchestra who were genuinely excited about the project. They split into groups based on instruments. David took the piano group naturally. There were 12 people in his section, ranging from complete beginners to a few who, like him, had some self-taught experience but wanted to improve. Those first few weeks were chaotic and beautiful. People made mistakes. They struggled with basic techniques. They got frustrated with themselves, but they also laughed and encouraged each other and celebrated small victories. When someone in the violin group finally played their first clear note without squeaking, the entire room applauded. When the eldest student, a 74-year-old woman named Betty who had always wanted to play trumpet, managed to play a simple melody, she had tears in her eyes. David found that teaching was different from performing but equally rewarding. He discovered he had patience he didn't know he possessed. He learned how to break down complex concepts into simple steps. He figured out how to encourage without overwhelming, how to challenge without discouraging. And he realized that in teaching others, he was learning new things about music himself. The program met every Saturday morning. After a few months, they decided to add an optional Wednesday evening session for people who couldn't make weekends. The attendance remained strong. People kept showing up, kept practicing, kept improving. Some of them would never be concert-level musicians, and that was fine. That wasn't the point. The point was that they were making music, creating something beautiful with their own hands, proving to themselves that it wasn't too late. 6 months after the program started, they organized their first showcase. Just a small informal concert where students could perform if they wanted to. No pressure, no expectations. About half the students chose to participate. David played too, but he wasn't the star. He was just one musician among many, and that felt exactly right. The audience was filled with family members and friends, people who came to support the performers. When Betty played her trumpet piece, her grandchildren cheered so loud they practically shook the rafters. When the bus driver performed a simple cello piece he had practiced for weeks, his teenage daughter cried. When the grocery store cashier played the clarinet, her co-workers from the store all stood up and applauded. David sat in the audience for most of the showcase, watching these people he had gotten to know over the months. He thought about how different this felt from his own viral moment. That had been about him, about individual achievement, about one person being discovered. This was about community, about people lifting each other up, about creating opportunities instead of just seizing them. After the showcase, as people were packing up their instruments and saying goodbye, Teresa found David. "You know what you've done here, right?" she said. "This program has changed lives. I've had students tell me they look forward to Saturdays now in a way they never did before, that they've made friends, that they feel like they're finally doing something they always dreamed about." David thought about his grandmother and her yard sale keyboard. He thought about all those midnight hours at the piano, playing for himself because he thought that was all there would ever be. He thought about that terrifying performance that had started all of this and how overwhelming and complicated the aftermath had felt. "I almost turned it all down," David admitted. "The performance, everything. I was so scared of what would happen if people saw me." "But you didn't turn it down," Teresa said. "You showed up. And then when things got overwhelming, you didn't run away. You found a way to make it work on your own terms." That was the thing, David realized. He hadn't become famous. He wasn't on TV or releasing albums or touring the country. His life still looked pretty much the same from the outside. He still worked as a maintenance worker at the concert hall. He still mopped floors and cleaned restrooms and did all the unglamorous work that kept the building running. But he had also opened a door, not just for himself, but for dozens of other people who thought music wasn't meant for them. The viral videos had mostly faded from the internet, replaced by newer content, newer viral moments. People had moved on to the next story, and David was grateful for that. He didn't need millions of views or thousands of followers. He had something better. He had a room full of people every Saturday morning who showed up eager to learn. He had students who sent him texts when they finally mastered a difficult passage, He had a community of people who understood that music wasn't about being perfect or professionally trained. It was about expression and joy and the simple human need to create something beautiful. David still played piano alone sometimes, late at night after his shift ended. But now he also played in front of people, teaching them, encouraging them, showing them that they could do this too. Both versions of himself existed now. The private musician and the public teacher. The invisible maintenance worker and the visible mentor. He didn't have to choose one or the other. He could be both. On a Tuesday evening, as David was finishing his cleaning rounds, he passed by the rehearsal room where the Wednesday group was practicing. Through the door, he could hear someone working through a piano piece, making mistakes but persisting, trying again and again until they got it right. He smiled and kept walking, his cleaning cart squeaking slightly on the marble floors. Some people might have looked at his life and thought he had wasted his opportunity, that he should have grabbed the fame when it was offered, should have become a star, should have capitalized on his viral moment. But David knew better. He had found his own stage, his own way of sharing his gift. And it turned out that stage wasn't about spotlights and applause. It was about Saturday mornings and patient instruction and watching someone else discover the joy he had known all along. That was enough. More than enough. That was everything.